Each year, 4,500 Americans die while crossing the road, and 3,533 Americans die each year from drowning. Can you imagine, keeping that human fatality rate in mind, how hard it must be to cross the road or swim across a river if you are not human, but instead a cute little green frog? Actually, when you think about it, most frogs can probably swim better than the average human, but let's pretend that's not the case here. I am also not entirely sure how accurate the statistics I just read out are, or what they would be in Australia. I honestly just got someone to Google how many people die from drowning each year and how many people die from crossing the road each year, and the top results just happen to be American, so I would take those statistics with a grain of salt. That said, if you were looking for accurate statistics on road safety and on drownings, looking for them in a review of a video game was probably not your best choice. So if anything, you're more to blame than I am, so I'm not sorry. But I digress. You don't actually need to imagine the situation at all, because the situation I am describing can actually be found in the video game Frogger.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen, from Parker Brothers, the creators of such great games as Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back and Trivial Pursuit, comes Frogger on the Atari 2600.
In this game, you, a little green frog, have been banished to an occupational health and safety disaster zone in which you must continuously cross a road and river. The aim of the game is to cross that road and river as many times as you can. Why the aim is this, I'm not entirely sure, but I just assume it's a frog thing. No doubt if a frog has to live near a road, they'd rather do it on the river side than the non-river side, so that's probably the explanation. And in this modern consumer society, it's not surprising you have to do this more than once. In fact, you have to do it an unlimited amount of times until you die. Every time you get to the end, you start off back at the beginning, and therefore your progression is really nothing more than an illusion. And if you think about it, you're only living for the sake of living. Therefore, if you think about it, this game might be the ultimate metaphor for life itself. The ever-flowing current of the river and the non-stop traffic of the road is no doubt symbolic of the passage of time. And just like time will present you with the obstacles of life, the river and the road have obstacles of their own. Most of the obstacles on the road come in the form of cars. However, there are a couple of trucks that look a lot like those little white milk bottle lollies that nobody likes, and yet they always come in variety packets. Honestly, I'm not sure who those lolly companies are trying to fool, and I'm pretty certain that nobody eats them. The river's obstacles are actually kind of inverted. While you're on the road, you're trying to avoid the obstacles that are coming at you. However, on the river, you're trying to avoid the blank spaces. The object is to not go in the water, and you want to be on the objects moving past. At first, I was a little bit surprised about this, because crossing the road, you've gotten used to avoiding the oncoming traffic, and you just assume you're going to do the same thing in the river. But no, apparently you have to avoid water, and you're probably one of those frogs that can't swim, which is pretty irresponsible for a frog. If you are a frog and you are going to live around water, you should learn to swim. And that also goes for any of you kids and adults at home, regardless of whether you're an amphibian or not. The planet has a lot of water on it, and with global warming there's just going to be more and more of it, so you owe it to yourself to learn to swim. If the little frog had been more proactive, then the second half of each stage would have been a lot easier, but unfortunately it hadn't, so you're stuck with jumping on lily pads and logs to try to get to the end. However, once you get to the end, you're struck with an unfortunate and confusing contradiction. You're not trying to get to the river bank on the end, you're trying to get to that little alcove of water on the end. That's right, after trying to avoid water all the way across the river, your objective is to jump into a little bit of water. At first I thought that this was absolutely ridiculous, but then I remembered that one of the most dangerous things about rivers is the current. So if the little green frog does in fact live in water, and all he's trying to do is find a calm place of the water where he won't be swept out to the ocean, then this makes perfect sense. No doubt you can see there are 5 little hidey holes at the top of the screen that are the perfect size to fit 5 little frogs. This is because they're designed specifically to fit 5 little frogs, and the object of each level is to get 5 across, and then it finishes the level and goes to the next level. The following level looks exactly the same as the previous level, except it moves a little bit faster, which you would know if you've watched many of my videos or have an Atari of your own that it is kinda common for the games on the system. This is in no way a negative. In fact, in Frogger, just as it does in most games on the Atari, it works well to increase the difficulty of the game. As you get higher up in the levels, you also encounter other obstacles, including a snake on the riverbank of the roadside, and a crocodile that replaces one of the logs on the river. some of the logs and the circular things, which could just as well be anything, but I think they might be lily pads, but I'm honestly not sure. But whatever they are, some of the logs and those circle things go under the water periodically. If you go in the water, you of course die, and back to the road traffic, if you get hit by a car, you also die. Some humans survive being hit by a car, but for a little green frog it becomes much less likely to survive such a high-speed incident. Also on the subject of dying, if you're carried up the screen by one of the objects in the river section, it will also kill you. However, if you're playing the game on the easier difficulty setting, this will instead just carry you to the other screen, so I guess it's a circle world and you're just going around like it's a conveyor belt. Each life you have a limited amount of time to get to the end, and if you don't get to the end before the time runs out, you also die. Like most games on the Atari 2600, the object of the game is to get the highest score. You get score by moving forward and by getting to the end of the level, and you can also get extra points by hopping on a white frog. I am assuming you get extra points for this thanks to white privilege and your proximity to it. Moving away from the gameplay for a second to the graphics of the game is clearly gorgeous. It is perhaps one of the most colorful games I've played on the Atari 2600, and it's probably got the best representation of imagery as far as most games go. For instance, you can clearly tell what trucks are, what the river is, and what the frogs are, and it requires very little imagination. When I'm looking at the game, I almost feel like I'm looking at a cartoon, so I definitely cannot fault the graphics for anything. On top of that, the sound effects are also fantastic, and the music that plays at the start is very cool as well. In many respects, I have to recognize that this is a fantastically done and beautiful game. However, all that said, I just cannot get into it myself. As I played the game, rather than enjoying myself, I found myself getting continuously frustrated. It felt like I continuously encountered cheap deaths, especially when I was on the log trying to get to one of the alcoves and then died because I'm assuming the log went underwater. I could never really work out how long you could be on the log or if there was much of a pattern to it. This is perhaps my fault, not the game's though. On top of that, trying to get into the alcove on the far left was often almost impossible, which is only there for about half a second, which barely gives you enough time to get on the log and get to the alcove before it's moved out of range. Because of this, when it gets to a faster speed, you almost always have to make a blind jump and just hope a log appears before you land in the water. Once again, however, I'm not entirely sure if this is my fault or the game's fault, and it's entirely possible there was a pattern that I just was not recognizing. So if you have got better pattern recognition than I have, maybe you should give the game a shot. If you're wondering how you would know if you have better pattern recognition than I have, perhaps play Frogger, and if you can easily detect the patterns in the current, you'll know that you have better pattern recognition than me. On top of that, this game also requires you to have patience, which is another virtue that I just simply do not own.
Patience is not my virtue.
So rather bizarrely, I'm going to have to give this game a sort of indecisive review. I recognize that the game is probably great, it looks great, and it plays really well. The controls are smooth and simple, you use your pleasure stick to navigate across the river and road, the objective is clear, and the game is challenging. However, I simply did not enjoy the game that much, but I think that's more of a reflection of me than the game itself. I found that while I've been doing these reviews, the games I've enjoyed the most are the ones that require high reflexes or have a lot of adventure in them. This game has neither of those two things and instead seems to be largely based on patience and pattern recognition. As such, if I was going to recommend this game to anyone, I would definitely recommend it to someone that was looking for something entirely different. It's definitely a very different game than Missile Command or Berserk or Space Invaders, and I think if you've been playing those games a lot and are looking for something completely different, this game would probably be very refreshing for you. So therefore, if you're looking for something completely different, or if you just want to test out your patience, or if you just want to make yourself frustrated, or even if you're looking for cute cartoony graphics, head down to your local video store and pick up a copy of Frogger on the Atari 2600.